Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Washington County Democratic Gubernatorial Candidates Forum. I'm Lisa Marin, Chair of the Washington County Democratic Committee. I'd like to thank all of you who are attending today, either in person or by Zoom. A note that the forum is also being recorded. I'd like to thank the Cobscook Institute for making it possible for us to hold this event in such a wonderful space and for their help in setting everything up to run smoothly today. Many thanks to the Washington County Dems Committee members for all the help they've extended to make this forum successful. And finally, I'd like to express my thanks to the candidates for coming to our county today to speak with us about the issues and challenges that affect all of us in our beautiful state of Maine. I have two announcements. Please, if you haven't already made your plan for voting, either before or on November 4th, right now you can take advantage of early voting by going to your town office. Early voting ends on Thursday, October 30th. Get that right.
Well done.
Also, due to a number of new candidates declaring their intention to enter the race and the realization that we would need a larger venue space, we have decided to cancel, for now, the Senatorial Candidates Forum, which had been scheduled for November 16th. We plan to reschedule the forum at a later date, so be looking out for that for sure. Let me begin with an explanation of today's format. This is a forum and not a debate. Questions were compiled from a few sources, from those who registered to attend, from community members, and from our Washington County Dems Committee. There will be opening remarks in which each candidate will have 2 minutes to introduce themselves. Next, each candidate will be asked to respond to a question. They will each be given 2 minutes to answer with a 15-second warning before their time is up. Candidates are arranged in alphabetical order, and I will rotate the order of whose turn it is to begin to answer. At the end of the question-answer period, each candidate will have 1 minute for a closing statement. Please hold your applause until the program has ended completely. By doing this, hopefully there will still be time and opportunity to meet and speak informally with the candidates after the program is ended. Shenna Bellows will give the first opening statement, followed by Jason Cherry, Troy Jackson, Angus King III, and Hannah Pingree. Okay. So now we will begin with our program, and I'll start the first question with Shenna Bellows. Question: Washington County, one of the state's most rural counties, has a large percentage of independent voters. What is your strategy for attracting these independent voters?
Thank you. And question, did you want us to do an
I'm
opening
talking.
statement first? I mean, I love that question though.
Pardon me. You're absolutely right. I'm not super experienced at this, just like you folks definitely are. So yes, excuse me. We want to begin with opening statements, starting with Shenna Bellows.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you for your leadership of the Washington County Democrats. Thank you everyone for turning out. My first time here at Cobscook was in 2005 when I was head of the ACLU. We've done a number of democracy and civil liberties workshops on these grounds. And so 3 things I want you to know about me. First, I'm a Down East girl. I grew up in the town of Hancock, a carpenter's daughter. My mother worked at Elscott's, the light bulb filament factory in Sullivan, and then in a greenhouse, and then became a home healthcare nurse. So I have working class roots. Some of you may know Ted Bellows. He was an electrician in Machias. My politics are obviously not the same as my Uncle Ted's, but I think we need to build bridges to cross party lines to bring people together. The second thing that I want you to know about me is I'm a fighter. I am battle tested in standing up to Donald Trump. And that is so important in these times as we defend our democracy, economic opportunity for all, healthcare, and everything that we hold dear. And then the third piece, and this circles back to my Uncle Ted, is that I'm a bridge builder. So throughout my entire career, from ACLU, where I founded Republicans for the Freedom to Marry when I was working on the marriage equality campaign, to my work in the state Senate, where I represented a district that voted for Donald Trump and voted for me in 2016, to my work as Secretary of State, where I've partnered with Republicans and independents and Democrats in the legislature to move forward modernization, things like appointments at the BMV, online services, and in elections, modernization like automatic voter registration at the BMV and online voter registration. So I'll stop there and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason Cherry. I am running on a government ownership platform. And so what that means is it means more democracy. None of us here in this room can come into this room and say, hey, the Republicans are knocking it out of the park. The Democrats are knocking it out of the park. When I'm out there, people do not like the political parties. And why? Do we have closed echo chambers? We had Biden's issue, we had Trump's issue, and now we have probably one of the worst presidents in history. As a former FBI agent for 20 years, a conservation officer, and a public defender, I've been on both sides of the law. So I know how the law works as an attorney, and as someone who has graduated with an economics degree, I have that. I have a minor in international trade and transactions, and as an assistant section chief, I was a supervisor for over 430 people and a budget of $150 million. And so what that means is every day I have meetings every day. I am working with time and materials contracts. I have executive power. So what I'm running again is on ownership. What we all want from government is competency, transparency, efficiency, and accountability. And we just do not have it now. We rely upon other sources of information, and now the younger generations are looking at TikTok as a 77% social media. We cannot be flat-footed about this as Mainers. We must get ahead of this and use those types of democratic mechanisms that will pull together the middle. The first one being is a citizens online forum. We need people that are registered voters to be able to go online and say, I don't like this law, or this is not happening. This is what Switzerland has, folks, and I'm not in competition with anyone here. If I'm voted as governor and I don't even like the title, you're all adults, you don't need to be governed. I'm a state administrator. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. My name is Troy Jackson. I'm running for governor for the hardworking people in the state that know that government's not been working for them, especially in places like Washington County. I know what that's like, and I certainly have felt it throughout my entire time. Matter of fact, I mean, I don't come from wealthy people. I don't have, fancy pedigree or, college education. I'm a logger by trade. And coming over here today, I actually saw somebody talking about the U.S. Senate race and said that they would like to have somebody in this Senate race that had a 4-year degree or more. And I said, well, people have a 4-year degree or more for a long time, and they've been screwing this country up for a long time. That doesn't really impress me a whole awful lot. What I like is what's in people's hearts. And what I remember coming across here today is we're driving across the airline road, was working in the logging industry here on Champion land, cutting wood down here whenever I couldn't make a living back up in Aroostook County, trying to make a living here. And, being away from my family, trying to make a living and stopping at that airline snack shop at 9 o'clock at night. You remember the old pay phones? I remember being on my stomach trying to find a quarter underneath my seat so I could call my wife and find out how she and my kids were. And that used to be what it was like for me. And when government got really bad, and we were trying to find a way to make things different. It wasn't there for me. And that's why I get into politics. And now 20 years later, I rose all the way to the Senate president's seat, and it still isn't working for people like me. And that's why I'm running for governor, because there's always people that have more power and influence than people like me. Even whenever I get to become Senate president, there's still people that are holding us back. And that's why I want to be governor, so that we can change the system, because it needs to be changed for people like Washington County and people like Aroostook County and all across this state.
Thanks. If you can't read my name card, I'm Angus King III. Look, thank you, Lisa, for having us, and for the whole county for y'all showing up on a Sunday afternoon. I'm running for governor because I want to serve the people of Maine, because life is too hard for too many people in this state. And I believe we can do a lot better with a fresh perspective and a different approach. Right now, the secret sauce that we had about being an affordable place to live has really gone away. And life is just too hard for too many people as they get through their day. Heat, housing, groceries, healthcare. No matter if you work hard, play by the rules, you're still slipping further and further behind. But we still live in a wonderful place, with great people who can do great things. So I think there's still real reason for optimism and hope if we start doing things in a fundamentally different way. So let me tell you a story about different, a story that's about manure. A few years ago, I realized that if we were going to have more clean air, clean water, and clean energy here in Maine, we needed to bring everybody together. So I got utility folks and farmers and clean energy and community leaders and thousands of cows. And we took something that they had a lot of, manure, and turned it into something that we all need, renewable energy. And today that project is heating thousands of homes, creating good jobs, lowering emissions for all of us here, and it's doing it all without adding costs to Maine families. I think there are two lessons from that story. The first is that there's not a single poop joke I have not heard. The second, though, is that I know something about turning things around, thinking differently, and getting stuff done. That's how I've built things that have solved problems to help people my whole career. Affordable housing for thousands of families, solar and wind projects across the country and around the world, and yes, a renewable energy company inside a gas utility. That's not the ordinary path to running for governor, but this is not an ordinary moment. And I think we need new kinds of leaders who can think differently, who can bring all the people of Maine together to build a better Maine. Thanks very much.
Great. Well, thank you, Lisa, and thank you all for showing up. Luckily, it's a little cloudy. That might have helped. My name is Hannah Pingree, and I grew up on an offshore island of just 400 people in Knox County, an island called North Haven. And as I grew up, everybody in my town was deeply involved. Both my parents volunteered as EMTs. They both served on the school board. They both ran small businesses. And that really formed the core of how I think about small towns and Maine and my responsibility to be a part of it. And I honestly, Maine has 482 towns. Most of them work in the same way. Neighbors care about each other, people are deeply involved, and we figure out how to solve problems. And that's really been sort of my introduction to public service and how I've been engaged. I ran for the Maine State Legislature when I was 25, representing a district of island towns in Knox and Hancock County. And I spent 8 years in the Maine Legislature with Troy, actually, and served as chair of the Health and Human Services Committee, majority leader, and speaker of the House. And I learned how to get things done in government. I fought chemical companies. I built affordable housing, as Angus did. I did lots of things to stand up for kids in our healthcare system. And I learned how government works when you need to stand up and you need to fight big corporations, but also how you can work across the aisle and work with Republicans. I was term limited when I was 32. I had 2 kids. I moved back to my hometown. I served on the school board, ran a small business, and started a housing organization. And then in 2019, I started working for Governor Mills, running her Office of the Future, where I really got to dig in on some of the long-term problems facing our state. Climate change, affordable housing, the opioid crisis. And I continued to learn, how do you get things done? How do we deliver for people? How do we tackle the kind of challenges we know that families all over this state are facing? So I left my job this May, and I'm now on the stump running for governor, like everybody else on this stage. And I will say there has never been a more important time to have governors who know how to stand up, how to deliver for people, how to lower costs, but also fight Trump. Governors are now being asked to do things that we didn't think governors had to do. So I'm ready for the fight. Thank you again for having me here, and I look forward to lots of questions.
Now the questions. Question one, and we'll start with Shenna. Washington County, one of the state's most rural counties, has a large percentage of independent voters. What is your strategy for attracting these independent voters?
It's the same strategy that I used in winning a district that had been held by a Republican state senator that voted for Trump and voted for me in 2016 and getting reelected twice, even though those 11 towns voted for Trump in 2024. And that is three things. First, it is reaching out and showing up, not just in spaces where Democrats show up, but where Republicans and independents show up. For example, if you listen to conservative talk radio, the Rick and George show on the Voice of Maine, you will hear me frequently. And it is why on primary day in 2024, after I had actually ruled Trump ineligible for the ballot, I was at the polls in Bucksport, and a gentleman came over to me and said, I know who you are, and I hear you on the radio all the time, and you and Trump are my favorite politicians. I kid you not. So I think showing up in spaces where independents and Republicans are comfortable to talk about the issues that matter. And that brings me to the second piece, and that is looking for shared values. Because when I talk to Republicans and independents, including in my own family, they have some of the same concerns that we have. Property taxes are out of control and people are worried about staying in their homes. Electricity costs are rising faster in Maine than anywhere else in the country. Healthcare. A lot of folks don't have healthcare. If they do, they're paying too much and they can't find a provider. Those are education. We've fallen behind. We used to be at the top of the nation and now we're in the bottom quartile behind Mississippi. And so when you talk to Republicans and independents, they're pissed off about those things and they care about those things too. So when I was a state senator, I worked on property tax relief and education issues. I partnered with Republicans to get bills passed. And then I could go back to that district and say, you told me this was an issue, and we worked on it together. And then finally, I've already started reaching out to independents and Republicans to support my campaign to build a winning coalition. Thank you.
I will actually say that I got two of your Republican local senator candidates to agree with me at the Blueberry Festival. As far as, hold on to your seats. But it's the same message. It's ownership. It's fairness. Let's look at government like we did when we were in elementary school. Everybody gets a choice. Everybody gets a voice. Because Maine has been a territorial government, you haven't been able to vote for your attorney general ever. There are 46 states that get to vote for their attorney general. That has never changed here. So having someone come up from the outside and say, hey, I think everybody would like to vote for someone that investigates and prosecutes criminal and civil crime. The other thing is that your chief election official should not be able to run for governor. That's like someone grabbing the bingo and saying, I have a card as well. And this is what and I don't mean any offense, but this is the person in charge of elections. You should not be able to run for governor and run for elections. And they love that because we need 43 states, folks, 43 states either votes by a committee for a bipartisan chief electoral official, or they elect that person. 46 states choose their own attorney general. And this is what is lost here, is there's no voice here for everyone that is in the middle, that is an independent. I started off as an independent, ran against Angus King, and the media was very much for the King dynasty. You could not have a debate in here. We asked for 5 town halls, and neither Susan Collin or Angus King would do that. Now, that's just arrogance. You have that political power. You need to answer to us and have a debate. And that just did not happen. So that is what's happening out in the street where we're talking to conservatives, is I'm a Jeffersonian Democrat. I believe in states' rights. I believe in us protecting Maine. Maine is for Mainers. These outside fourth, estate newspapers, they don't cover our issues.
Well, one, I think we have to get rid of that elitism that talks about how you have to be so college educated to run, like I talked about earlier. People have good ideas across the state, no matter what walk of life they come from. And when you talk about the logging industry, the fishing industry, the farm industry, People are hardworking and they're smart and they know what they're doing. And when you talk about, education, things like that, that's important. But, making people feel like they're not educated, they don't know what they're doing. That elitism is what drives people away in politics, and independent voters, on Republican voters. I think that's unfortunate. Democrats don't own, the educated class or anything like that. And that's what I think is driving people away from us. And when I first got elected, I was an unenrolled voter. Well, the reason why I wanted to become a Democrat is because we were talking about things like healthcare, prescription drugs, minimum wage, good jobs and things like that. And I think we've gotten away from that. I think we need to get back, lean into those things, because that's what's driving people right now. Affordability issues, crisis issues that people are really having a hard time with. And we don't talk about those things as much as we used to. And we should be talking about those things because they are the things that are really concerning people right now. Property taxes, childcare, nursing homes. I mean, right here in Machias, they were going to close down your veterans homes. And we had a choice to make if we were going to fight for that or not. And I was told, you know what, when I was Senate President, they told me that, well, we'll keep Aroostook County open, but no, we're not going to keep Machias open. And I said, the hell with that. We're going to keep Machias open too. And that's what we did, was we kept them both open, because I knew Machias needed that just as well as Aroostook County. We have a crisis across this state of healthcare, not just in Aroostook County, but all across it. And that is the type of things that people worry about all across this state. And I think that is what Democrats need to be talking about, so that regardless if you're an independent or a Republican, you believe that people are in your corner. And right now, no one feels like they're in our corner.
I've been working to get approval from independents my whole life. But look, I think the way to do it is to focus on the kitchen table topics that people talk about every day at the end of their day when they're trying to figure out, did their kid get a decent education? Can they afford the roof over their head? Can they afford healthcare for their parents? Can they scrape enough money to get together in order to go fishing for a little time during the summer? Right? I think you've got to focus on the issues that people worry about day in and day out. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or an independent or a Democrat. Those challenges are real, and they are all of our challenges. I have an old friend named George Smith, who many of you probably know. He was a leader in the Republican Party. He was the director of SAM, the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine. And one day someone walked up to George and said, "George, I think you and I disagree on about 90% of the way the world works." George, without missing a beat, said, "Well, let's focus on the 10%. We should follow George's example. You don't agree with me on how to fix the economy? Let's work on how we're going to build more housing. You don't agree with me on how we're going to fix education? Let's work on how we're going to cut red tape for small businesses. Why don't we focus on how we're going to reduce healthcare costs together, and then we can duke it out on climate?" I think that's the kind of thing we can do. We can always focus on the common ground that we share, focus on it with common sense, the least common of all senses, I'm told. And I think by doing that, we can make a real difference. That's what I've done my whole life. I have built companies and jobs and clean energy projects and housing, and I've done it by bringing people together, focusing on what we had in common and knowing how to get the job done. And I think with that kind of experience, we can make a real difference here in Maine.
This is a great question, Lisa. Because the independents can actually now vote in our primary. So this is one of the first, I think the first gubernatorial election that independents and Democrats can vote in the Democratic primary, and independents can also vote in the Republican primary. So it's not just hypothetical, it's actually going to be immediate. And we'll see how it turns out. I will say, I think we all probably agree the best way to engage is to listen. And honestly, I spent a lot, the way you run for public office, the way I ran for the legislature was showing up and knocking on people's doors. And I met all of my constituents across many, many towns, and I'd knock on the door of a fisherman and he'd tell me exactly what his opinion was. And I did it lots more times. And you learn that government is about going out and listening to people. There's no sort of magic thing here. And that's what everyone who is running for governor needs to be doing. And it's what I have been doing. And I will say, as you go out and listen, you do hear people are frustrated. They're very worried about the future of our healthcare system and not being able to afford insurance, not being able to have their hospitals stay open. They're worried about their kids' education. They're worried about property taxes. Again, I think we all agree that folks have a lot on their minds and they want leaders who will show up and listen and know how to get things done. I have spent quite a bit of time actually over the last couple of years working in Washington County on storm recovery. And I think you all probably remember well the storms of 23 and 24. They were devastating for our entire state. Especially in Washington County, it was hit very hard. A lot of the wharves were washed away. And I was able to work with Republicans and Democrats in the legislature on one of the largest storm recovery packages in our state's history. I then partnered with Billy Bob Fockingham, a state rep from down here, on LD1, which was the bill the legislature picked to be the first one to figure out how do we get better, how do we get ready for the storms ahead? Because we know they are not going to stop. And again, Billy Bob didn't want to talk about climate change, but he wanted to talk about emergency preparation and rebuilding working waterfronts. So you find common ground and you figure out how do you get things done. And that's what you need to do in politics. And I think that's obviously what we need to do on a lot of issues. So thank you.
Thank you. Next question. Maine's rural hospitals are under threat like never before. How would you shore up our hospitals and in particular, assure access to women's health care and provide obstetric units? And we'll start with Jason Cherry this time.
We just had a debate down in Augusta on this very issue, and it's attracting enough investment in here without opening the doors to adverse and agreed. So you may have noticed that 11 different nursing hospitals or nursing centers actually went under because the private equity group took all the assets and kind of just left it in the hands of the state. So the state needs to take a bigger role in investing, and I'm talking about annuities and bridge loans, so like 5-6% above APR. This is the exact investment rate where you can get clusters of private investors to invest in these environments, because it's either up to big money, which is out there like BlackRock, or it's up to us to try to create some innovation. And again, competency is important in this, is having someone that knows investments to bring in investments and regrow these types of medical facilities, because they're not coming up here unless they're going to be able to make some sort of an investment rate. That's just the reality of the world, unfortunately. And as someone who has graduated from a law school, and again, competency is a big thing. It was one of the things that I talked to the Republicans. I said, you say, run it like a business, run it like a business. You have Austin Terrio, who's a race car driver. What does he know about the law? What does he know about economics? He gets 1.3 million for Trump Jr. And that's the danger of popularity, folks. You can choose someone that you think is popular, but down with your lives and with the lives of your families and friends, we need competency. And in this, there's going to have to be, we have so many crises here, housing, energy. We're going to need to work across the table. And that's what I do, is to work across the table to find those investments so we can bring back more doctors here and long-term sustainable healthcare. Thank you.
I mean, I would fund Planned Parenthood and all that up front. I would put that in the baseline budget right at the gate, instead of having them have to come beg to the legislature all the time and at the end sometimes not get in. I've watched that be a battle at the end where the governor would play games. I think the last session I was in there, we had the bill actually ready to go and be signed, and she didn't even accept the bills, which was really unfortunate. That's healthcare that is going to be, I think, for 10,000 people in Worcester County, down in Ellsworth, that is not even going to happen. Which is really unfortunate. And private equity places, companies are not the people that I think should be deciding healthcare across the state. I believe that the state needs to step in, use their buying power, use their ability to hold these people accountable and have better healthcare. In the same way with nursing homes. We do not have to have, in a time whenever we have $1 billion in the rainy day fund, we have millions of dollars in OSRs all across state government. I don't know what we're building all these revenues for, and having the administration talk about how nursing homes have all this money are making all this money when they're closing all across the state. I mean, now is the time to help these places out when it's a crisis. And I feel very strongly about that. And so this would be something that I would make a priority in my administration, because I feel that, you know, people in Maine deserve this health care. And, you know, they've gone their whole lives. People are feel, you know, the real concern when they get up in the morning about what are they going to do with their mother and father. They've worked their whole lives, and now they're at the end and there's nowhere to go with them. And this is something I feel very strongly about. And we've watched how people have let them, you know, swing in the wind.
I'll tell you that the first thing I wouldn't do is have tax cuts for billionaires and pay for it by cutting healthcare for people here in Maine. That was a disastrous decision, and everything we can do to push Washington to undo some of that damage is going to be really important. It's obviously going to have huge impacts on rural hospitals, huge impacts on nursing homes that you've already seen the front edge of here in Washington County. Then I think there are a lot of things we have to do on the healthcare front in order to preserve access and affordability. First is I think we have to think about new models of delivery. Right now, our fee-for-service model just simply does not work. One of the issues is it's incredibly inefficient. The healthcare industry today sends about 9 billion faxes every year. I think it's been 9 billion years since I've seen a fax. And that's an enormous amount of inefficiency that we've just got to get rid of. I think there are other things we can also do in terms of public health improvements. You cannot legislate jumping jacks, but I think there's a lot of work we can do to try and focus on preventative care, early interventions, and more public health work that will end up reducing the utilization and the needs that we've got for the healthcare system that is already on the brink well before the president has started to do his worst. The next thing I think we can do is spend time on workforce. Our healthcare workers are in a very tough spot right now, and there are just simply not enough of them. And I think we've really got to invest and figure out ways in order to make sure that we train them and get them into the places where they need to be, including places like rural Maine. And then the last piece is on telehealth. I think there's a lot of work we can do that is, again, not going to help if you have to deliver a baby up here, but it sure is going to help you access healthcare more quickly, more affordably. And I think it can make a big difference if we can get the broadband into the right places where people need it.
Access to affordable healthcare, especially in the rural parts of our state, is obviously critical. I mean, our communities cannot survive if people don't have the ability to go to find medical care, whether it's primary care, to be able to get to a hospital. I mean, you want young people to stay in this area. So it is absolutely fundamental that we find ways to do it. And as we've talked about, it is extremely at risk right now. This incredibly bad bill that passed in Washington over the summer is going to promise huge cuts to Medicaid, to Medicare. Obviously, we're having a huge fight in Washington right now where Democrats are standing up for the Affordable Care Act subsidies. If that fight is not won, thousands of people in Maine are going to lose access to healthcare. Actually, my family is one of them. We have a plan that's going to go up 26% already. And if we don't get these tax credits extended, the prices could double. This is, again, for thousands of families and small businesses in Maine. So this is going to be probably one of the most fundamental challenges the next governor faces. How do we kind of bring this huge rural healthcare system with a lot of aging Mainers? How do we shore it up and keep it going? It's not going to be easy, honestly. It's going to be something that's going to require creativity. It's going to require state investment. It's going to require some of the things my colleagues have mentioned, like how do we better train the workforce? How do we help people find access to primary care in their community? Because we are losing healthcare facilities and nursing homes in our state. I agree with Troy. I think we need to ban private equity from buying healthcare facilities in Maine. That's obviously kind of worst case scenario. I just actually have an op-ed in the Portland Press Herald this weekend about why we need a public option in our healthcare system so that people can afford insurance. Insurance is obviously not the silver bullet, but if you don't have insurance, it becomes a lot harder to keep healthcare facilities open. The last thing I'll say is I think you mentioned family planning, and I drove by family planning in Machias. We know that the big, beautiful, terrible bill also cuts reproductive health care. That's, again, just one of these things we absolutely need to ensure because young people and women and everybody else needs access. So a lot to be done on healthcare, and I'm sure we'll have another question about it.
Actually, yes.
Good.
So I think,
I'm sorry.
Thanks, Jerry. So
Savior.
we were really poor when I was a kid. We didn't have electricity until I was in the 5th grade. And whether it was kerosene lamps or genetic luck of the draw, I have really bad asthma, and the emergency room has saved my life more than once. So rural healthcare infrastructure is a matter of saving lives, but also making sure that Maine is a place where young people can stay or come and live and raise a family and work. We really have to make sure that we're protecting our basic infrastructure, including emergency rooms, primary care, birthing centers, and family planning. And so I think, and I will just say one more thing. My mother worked in a greenhouse, Surrey Gardens, for most of her life until she was 49 years old. And she went back to school to become a nurse through the University of Maine system. And that was the first time in her adult life that she had health insurance. My father, self-employed carpenter, didn't get health insurance until the Affordable Care Act. So I think that this issue of lack of access and lack of coverage has been going on for a long time. And I believe that no one should be sick because they're poor or poor because they are sick. Healthcare is a universal human right, and we need to get to 100% coverage in our state. No matter what that looks like, we need to look at all the options on the table. And for that healthcare infrastructure, it's going to take state funding. We are going to have to think about grant funding. We're going to have to think about strategically where in the state do we need to make sure we have healthcare infrastructure to support the local economy, to support the healthcare of our residents, and healthcare for all. And finally, I'll just say I've been working for over 20 years to protect and defend reproductive freedom and supporting Mabel Wadsworth Women's Health Center, family planning, and Planned Parenthood. That's non-negotiable when I'm your governor.
Thank you. All right, next question. How will you address the ever-changing recommendations from the Department of Health and Human Services concerning the availability of vaccines for children, youth, adults, and the elderly? And we'll begin with Troy Jackson.
Well, can I just say, I want to say that obviously what Trump's doing is horrific, and what he's doing to our healthcare. But I got to say, our healthcare problem was before Trump. And as far as I'm concerned, our healthcare was not good before that. I mean, Holton shut down the maternity ward, and there's 2 kids that was born in the emergency room, or not in the emergency room, in the van. I mean, so we have problems with our healthcare way before Trump, and I just don't want to continue to talk about, if Trump wasn't here, our healthcare system would be better. It wouldn't be. It sucked before. So the state has all kinds of problems and reasons that it should be working on that, previous to Trump. So, and with the vaccines, I mean, I would fight to continue. I mean, one of the things I will give Governor Mills credit for is that she continued to, make COVID vaccines available, through what, President Trump did. And I would continue to do that. I would continue to make sure that people had access to vaccines. I mean, I believe in vaccines, and that would be something that I would continue to do and use the state to get vaccines into Maine so that people could have access to them. Flu vaccines, COVID vaccines, everything that we know is right. And, forgetting about what Kennedy carries on with, we know these are safe and effective. And if people want to be vaccinated, they should have that opportunity to, and it should be available. And that would be something that I would do, use that state's availability to do that. So that would be what I would do. But again, I just gotta, keep pounding on the fact that our healthcare system was in crisis before Donald Trump ever became president.
Troy's absolutely right. Our healthcare system was entirely broken long before Donald Trump showed up, and that is something we just can't keep doing what we've been doing. It's just fundamentally broken, and we've got to do it in a different and innovative and really systems level way. to talk to the question specifically, look, I think when you've got a medical question or a scientific question, you should go to a doctor or a scientist. They are giving bad information and bad advice. And I like living in a state where I don't know anybody who's died of measles or had polio. And I hope we can continue to be a state like that. And look, we don't need things to be broken when we've already got a system that's really under siege. It's really exactly the wrong direction. I think but on top of the bad advice, they're also cutting research funding. They're also hurting some life-saving research funding, some of which is being done right here in Maine. Right? We have people who are doing incredible work on how to extend people's lives, on how to work through disease, on how to be a healthier population. And cutting that research is the most wrong-headed, crazy, stupid idea you've ever heard of. And on top of that, it's hurting some really great organizations here in Maine. So what do we do? I think part of it is we're going to have to, as Troy said, the governor's doing a good job. Other governors, I think we're going to have to work together with. A lot of other governors in the West have come together to pull together to have sort of a regional CDC where they're giving out information to combat this misinformation and working together in that way. If you elect more Democratic governors across the country, that's going to continue to be incredibly important so that kind of first line of defense or first line of information can be preserved. So I think that's the kind of thing we're going to have to do. We're going to have to think about how do we work together, how do we do this differently, and how do we make sure we're fighting the really bad ideas and bad results that are coming from Washington.
This is one of those issues where we are in uncharted waters. I mean, we used to rely on the federal CDC to be monitoring outbreaks around the world. I mean, Maine's law actually said that we would follow CDC guidance for COVID vaccines and the childhood vaccination schedule. Obviously, that doesn't work anymore. And that's one of these areas in which governors are really going to have to step up. They absolutely do need to think about how do we work regionally, because we only have so many staff at the Maine CDC. And we're now going to have to be doing much more heavy lifting to monitor outbreaks, to make recommendations, to ensure that people in Maine have good public health guidance. But clearly, we're in a scenario where we no longer can trust Washington, and that's not good for our people or our health. I do trust the people in Maine. We have good scientists, good doctors working at the Maine CDC and working across the state. The state is already participating in a multi-state alliance of governors thinking about how do we tackle this. So I think that it's going to be one of those areas until we have some rebuilding of the federal government. We're going to need to keep doing this. And there are going to be many areas like this where states are going to have to collaborate and think about how do we protect our people in a more vibrant and obviously important way. And there are a lot of other issues like this. I mean, Donald Trump has just gotten rid of the Civil Rights Division at the U.S. Department of Education. That was how we protected kids. He's obviously threatening immigrants. He's threatening LGBT rights. He's threatening women's right to choose. So there are going to be so many areas where U.S. governors are going to have to step up and figure out, can we work regionally? Do we have to work on our own to protect our citizens? Because some of the front lines that we used to rely on to protect people's civil rights, to protect their health, they're no longer going to be there. So that's why this is such an important time to think about governors who have experience, who can figure out how to work regionally and collaboratively and know how to get things done to protect their citizens.
I think this is an area where we all agree, and I think that's great. We're all pro-vaccines, just like Mainers. Remember, the vaccine referendum in 2020 passed overwhelmingly, even here in Washington County. And I think those regional collaborations with other governors are going to be extraordinarily important, just as has been said. As Secretary of State, I meet with other secretaries of state every 2 weeks in an election working group, Democrats and Republicans. And we're talking about how to defend your voter data, how to defend our elections. And I think that experience in collaborating with other states is going to be vitally important as we move forward, just as Hannah said, because we're seeing it on all fronts. For example, the federal government recently stopped publishing pregnancy and maternal health data called the PRAMs. I oversee the Permanent Commission on the Status of Women, and so we put together a policy brief and a guide for how Maine, which is collecting the data is collected in the states, could be publishing that data so that we can continue to monitor maternal health outcomes. So I think that type of innovation is what we're going to need in vaccines and across the board. My mom, she became a nurse. She was a home healthcare nurse during the pandemic. She was taking care of COVID patients in their homes. And at the beginning of the pandemic, remember when Trump was president, there was no materials to protect themselves, no protective gear, no masks. I was reaching out to every carpenter contractor that I knew to help get my mom outfitted to take care of her patients safely. So Maine is resourceful. We're creative. I know we can do it, but we're going to have to be really thoughtful. And I think we need tested, experienced leadership that has worked with other states already to resist Trump, to fight back and protect our healthcare.
Shenna's right. We just came back from a forum where I mentioned RFK and the non-science that has taken over the CDC. So I'm not seeing eye to eye with the conservatives on this, Republicans. But so what the issue is misinformation. Again, we are losing the battle on data, on information. The amount of people that actually say vaccines are safe and effective, it's going down. So those rates through social media, through News Corps, Fox News, and his advisors, the misinformation, that's getting out there and that's polluting the voter base. And so how do we fight this? We fight it with critical thinking. These youth who are going to inherit this government that's going to be based on social media, unless we have, some means to have facts and opinions there, we need a good, healthy debate. We need transparency on what vaccines are, and we need it at the school level because these kids are going to grow up looking at these different, Fox News, OAN, Max News, all these things that are starting to sprout up like mushrooms, plus all the global influence. We need more channels of communication, not only within the schools, but between the healthcare and for all the patients, because they're getting their advice from their buddy. And even now, Reddit has a campaign saying, a fisherman's there, and they're saying, I'm getting advice from my buddy that, raw eggs will take care of this. Well, no, go talk to a doctor, go talk to a scientist. This is the problem with misinformation, is that you've got to push up against it or it will take over the dialogue. And it is, folks. And as state administrator, again, it's governor, but you're all adults. You would hire me as an attorney and someone with economics, someone who works under a pressure cooker, someone who actually has executive power and has used it, coming in from the outside. I have no bad blood with anyone at the legislature, and I want to get things done to fight that type of misinformation.
Next question. The needs of thousands of Mainers with intellectual and developmental disabilities are not being adequately met. Reasons for this include the inability to attract and retain direct support workers in a demanding job for low pay. Healthcare providers lack the training to adequately treat this population, and employers having little incentive to hire workers who need accommodations. If elected, how would you improve the support system for this population, especially for adults with more complex needs? And we'll begin with Angus King III.
Yeah, this is a really good question, and I think you've actually identified a lot of the places where we really need to focus. Number one, on the workforce, and this is an issue with healthcare training in general. We are short on workforce in our healthcare system overall. Right. And our ability to work with the colleges and universities that we have in the state, work with the schools, work with the state, work with the needs on the other side, and really make sure that we're getting the people, we're getting students who are coming through our colleges and universities prepared and ready and interested in these jobs is really, really important. And I think we've got a lot of work left to do. The second piece is on training. Once they're sort of out of college or out of school, I think we've got to do a lot of work. And again, it's how do we recruit and how do we retain those people? So it's not just about training. It's also about, are we making sure that they can earn a living wage, and a wage that doesn't require them to sacrifice a quality of life, and also that they don't get totally burned out in a difficult job. And then finally, again, I think a lot of it is around education for employers. There are a lot of employers in Maine that are doing really proactive, important work on this topic and making sure that they are finding ways for people with disabilities to have jobs in their companies. It's a great opportunity for a lot of businesses, and I think a lot of it comes down to better education for our employers here. And I think there's a lot of work we can do.
It's probably be another question with a lot of agreement from all of us up here. Obviously, making sure that your child with disabilities has access, especially early interventions, so that they have the best start, so that that this is sort of one of the challenges we've been facing right now as a state. Rebuilding our child development services system in the schools. And I think there's been a lot of good work actually done in Washington County on that, because we know if we can intervene with kids, they have a much better chance at succeeding as they grow up. No matter what, I think Angus is absolutely right. People who do this work are not paid enough. And we have seen that. We've had some good work done in the legislature. I think Troy led on some of that, trying to increase pay for direct care workers, who a lot of the folks working with folks with disabilities are direct care workers, not being paid enough. That's a challenge of our state budget. How do we figure out how to pay for all the things we need right now, especially at a time in which, again, the federal government is cutting back and a lot of these services are paid for by Medicaid. You probably in this room know this, but 75% of the kids in Washington County are on Medicaid. This is this is sort of why investment in our Medicaid system, investment in healthcare, investment in the kind of services that people with disabilities rely on, especially to keep them in their homes, especially to keep them in their families and their schools, is absolutely going to be essential. And it's going to be a hard job for the next governor to figure out how, the federal government didn't cut back on the Medicaid services for kids, but the overall taking money out of the system is going to be challenging for all of us. It is absolutely we need more workers in this. I think a lot of families have a hard time finding services because of the lack of workers. Things like free community college, things like investments in our career and technical education schools. That's one of the ways we can help more kids get into these jobs, especially if we figure out how to pay them more. So there's a lot to be done. And again, I think the Department of Labor does some good work to try to help people in the workforce. But those programs are not robust enough, especially in the rural parts of our state.
I agree. There's a lot we all agree on in this area. I think it's really important. I owned my own business for a while. I had a consulting practice, and I was hired through a grant through Developmental Disabilities Council of Maine to work with parents of adult children with intellectual and developmental disabilities and family members and self-advocates. And I did work with them to train them in advocacy before the legislature and in media. And we did a series of press conferences together to highlight some of the issues that were facing that community. And those relationships initiated then have continued through my political career. I have a couple of self-advocates, adults with intellectual disabilities, who call me on a frequent basis to just chat about what's on their mind. And I think what I'm hearing from the folks that I worked with then and remain friends with now is that we need to raise reimbursements for direct care workers in Maine. It is still far too low. We need to have a robust system for paying family caregivers because it is work. We need to streamline the process for applying for benefits through the state. And this is an area I have some experience in. When I talk about faxes, insurance companies used to fax everything to the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. I came in and we established an electronic system for transmitting insurance information to the BMV. I think we need a one-stop shop, a single application for Medicaid and Medicaid eligible benefits so that people don't have to fill out reams of paperwork across different agencies to qualify for things. And then finally, in terms of training, I think this is a great role for public-private partnerships for the Department of Labor and Health and Human Services to work with employers to encourage them to expand recruitment, to include adults who have the abilities to work. And that's going to help raise Maine's economy as well. So those are just a few ideas. Thank you.
It's a very vulnerable population. And when I was a public defender, unfortunately, I would often find myself representing people with disabilities because they get in conflict with the law. Also, as an FBI agent, I investigated a bunch of human trafficking cases, and they would prey on young women that were, they had difficulties out there in the real world. So where do we treat these people so that this type of compassion is not only what defines us as a population, but also is sustainable? And we have a number of, it's going to take some innovation because we have a federal government that is off its rocker right now. But we need to look into Maine at the properties that we have here that can be converted into these types of workshops. These people will live better in an area where they're not going to be subjected to the drug trafficking. And so one of those areas is where I'm at in Unity. It's the Unity College there. It's just sitting there. Why don't we switch that off? Is that my phone or someone else's? Oh, okay. That's all right. I'm a 60-hour-a-week attorney, so usually it's my phone. So with that, oh wait. All right. So with that, is to take that same idea of a decent return rate, and not the type that BlackRock likes, the 26%, but the 8 to 5%, to put that into locations like the Unity College or the Environmental College, where we have places where people can stay. So these workers that want to work with disabled individuals, citizens, have not only payment, but part of their salary is free rent because that is owned by the state or this group. So this is the type of innovation that needs to be here in Maine, but also for the lobster harvestry. There's a lot of harvestry industries here on the East Coast that need housing, and we can try to facilitate that through a group low investment rate housing. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, I mean, this is obviously going to be challenging with, what Trump's bogus bill obviously is going to cut for money coming to Maine. But I mean, I think this is about, our priorities here in Maine, and, not, for nothing, but like I'm the only one here that actually has worked on these things over the last, 5-6 years in the Maine legislature. We passed the bill to do 125% of the minimum wage to increase payments going to direct service workers. It wasn't enough. My last term, we tried to, for independent living specialists, we tried to just put language in for them to, get what they wanted for a study to show how they were not getting paid enough. We couldn't get that through with the administration and the budget. Once again, it all comes down to what the priorities are for the administration that you have at the time. And that's, again, what my frustration is. In a time whenever we did have money, even this past session, the legislature was told that it was crisis, bleak times. And at the end of the legislature, additional $152 million came in revenues, which could have been used in some way. I mean, obviously there's always priorities, but sometimes those priorities are not things like this. And that's what my argument is that there are things out there that people deserve to have funded, but there's always people with influence that are pushing forward on other things that I don't believe are the right priorities. And that's why I believe that there should be a change in what our priorities are as everyday working class Mainers. And this is something that I feel very strongly about, that minimum wage workers that are doing hard jobs should be getting paid more for a job that is very hard, and they deserve more pay. They deserve to be treated adequately, just like childcare workers, nursing home workers deserve to be paid more.
Thank you. Next question. Property taxes are an ever-increasing burden for Maine homeowners. This is especially true for working-class families and the elderly. As governor, how would you address this issue? And we'll start with Hannah Pingree.
Great. Well, we have been hearing about property taxes a lot, and I think probably everybody in this room pays property taxes, as do my husband and I. And the bills are going up, and they are challenging. There are some things that a governor absolutely has to do, like fully fund revenue sharing, which is obviously a part of how municipalities pay their revenue, how we think about school funding. But obviously, even those things are not enough because we need to keep people in their homes. And we've seen, obviously, the escalation in home prices and home values are one of the things that's really driving a lot of people to see their property taxes go out of a range in which they can afford. So the price of a home in Maine has doubled since 2020. That's obviously a huge symptom of our housing crisis and young people not being able to afford homes in the state or find rents, but it also has driven property taxes because we've seen an escalation in the rate in which residential properties, what their values are compared to businesses, compared to other types of properties. So the governor's going to have a lot to do. The legislature actually has a big task force going on this right now, but we're going to have to deliver specific relief, especially so folks who are low income, who are elderly can stay in their homes because nobody should be forced out of their homes because of high property taxes. So things like increasing the homestead exemption or specific tax rebate programs can help. But I honestly think there's a bigger question here. I have talked about how do we think about our tax system overall? How do we think regionally? Because honestly, we are spending a lot of money in communities that could be better working together. No town wants to be told what to do. I lived through school consolidation in the legislature. That did not work. But are there carrots that we can give communities that help them figure out how can they better collaborate? I also think as a state, we need to rethink how we do revenues in general. We don't tax people who come to visit us in the summertime anywhere near as much. So second homeowners who do not live in Maine year round, how do we think about a differential tax rate? It would require a change in the Constitution, but it could help lower property taxes for Maine people. So we need some big ideas on the table because I think this is about how do Mainers and how do our communities, how do we keep them the way in which I think we all love.
I think this may be the biggest issue in the general election because I'm hearing about it everywhere, from unorganized territories to coastal communities to cities and small towns. People are really scared that they're not going to be able to stay in their homes because the revaluations have driven up property taxes in some significant ways for people all across the state. So 1 in 6 Maine homes right now is a vacation home. And we absolutely need to be taxing them more. Other states do this. A friend who has a home in South Carolina told me they get taxed 50% more. And so I think it's really, I need to do some research into that, but I think it's really important that we look into how do we adequately tax those vacation homes. The second piece is funding at the state level. So it used to be that the state paid for special education and English language learning at the state level. And one of the challenges we see in school budgets is we see fights over school funding and towns rejecting the school budgets. And one of the drivers in the school budgets is special education, which is so incredibly important. But it's hard to predict at the local level who's moving in, who's moving out of town. So I think the state taking that responsibility, in addition to paying 55% of general school funding, and in addition to funding revenue sharing. Additionally, I know Washington County right now is in a world of hurt because of Republican mismanagement of the finances at the county level. And I think we need to look at what are the state mandates, for example, with the county jails, where the state makes sure that we're paying our fair share at the state level, but also have some oversight into what's happening locally. So things like that shouldn't and can't happen. And finally, I think the wealthy do need to pay their fair share. Overall, we need more tax fairness. Millionaires and billionaires should be paying their fair share of the tax burden in the state so that it's not falling on the property taxes, it's not falling on the homeowners.
This is another crisis without a silver bullet. So it's a multi-factor resolution to this. And one of them is, as Shenna and Hannah said, is looking at the vacation homes and seeing whether or not it makes sense to tax these houses at a greater rate due to the fact that these individuals use these mostly as an investment property or a property that doesn't necessarily contribute to the local economy. The second thing is efficiency, right? Competency, transparency, efficiency, and accountability. This is what government owners want. And this is the help with someone that comes in from the outside, folks. I'll give you an example. Here in Maine, you've got, instead of one bar association, you've got 1, 2, 3 offices. You've got the Office of Examiners, Office of Overseers, and a bar. And they all have to discuss things together. This is not changed in the beginning. And I don't want to state that we're not doing things efficiently, but we need to look at the future for virtualization of all these siloed programs. And that's what I do as an attorney now. I'm a data breach attorney. I know a great deal about how to virtualize an entire system. We need a network architect. We need services where when you ask for something, a ticket is generated like most states. You get that ticket, you get some services so that you don't have to waste your efforts. We don't have to hire more people than we need and to do things the old way. I realize this is vacation land and there's a lot of great things about vacation land, but all I want to do is take that LL Bean canoe, take off that shellac and put on some polyurethane. That's basically what I want to do with the technology is to make sure that we're not working in silos. The other thing that we have here in Maine is that we love our cities. We don't want everything consolidated down at the county or school level, but we may need to have that, folks. And if we have it, we need to be transparent about it and have it in some ballot measures to say, okay, we've got all these resources in Hancock and Washington. Can we combine them to make something more efficient?
May 19th is when I announced my candidacy, and I was the first candidate to announce that I would do tribal sovereignty on day one. So the second thing I'd do was I'd put together a task force on property tax reform. And I got a lot of ideas on what I would do on this, but one of the things I proposed in my last couple terms in the legislature was raising the revenue sharing from 5 to 7%. Because revenue sharing has been 5% since its inception. Obviously, everything that's gone up, inflation and everything, the state should be sending back more money to towns and municipalities in revenue sharing to help offset some of the burden of property taxes. But clearly, with inflation, with the rise in homes, we're not keeping up. And when I first came back in the legislature 8 years ago, Paul LePage had, stolen, revenue sharing to give the biggest income tax cut in the history of the state of Maine. And that was part of the driver. But now all of the, increase in homes is, wiped out everything we did for property tax reform. And we have to make, real changes. And I do think that I don't know that we can change our constitution. I mean, obviously we could send it out. I don't know if the people are going to vote for that, but we can do things to actually give property tax reform. We can offset that and meals and lodging tax. We could do that with a lot of different ways that we could give money back to Mainers, to people that have been here. And I don't just think that it has to be people that only have one home or anything like that. I mean, I think it has to be means tested, but we got in trouble before with people that might have had a camp or something like that, and we didn't want their property taxes going on to their camp. And that was a problem with that, but I think we can give real relief to Mainers, and that's what I want to do.
Yeah, I think high property taxes are a symptom of all of the costs that we're currently drowning under. It has just gotten too expensive to live here in Maine, and a lot of towns are having the same experience that a lot of families are having, right? For the town, the healthcare costs have skyrocketed. For the town, energy costs have skyrocketed. For the town, housing costs have skyrocketed, and they've got to pay employees and make sure that they're competitive. They've got to make sure that they're covering healthcare for the people who live and work in that town, for that town. All of those things are showing up in town budgets. School costs have also gone up. And I think one of the things we've got to do is really think, and how can we help towns innovate? How can we help towns think about how do they reduce costs? How do they lower energy costs? How do they take care of their employees, but still try and be more efficient, try and be more responsive, and try and not have some of the processes, some of the duplication, some of the costs that I think are starting to bog down some town budgets. Ultimately, if we don't solve the town budget problem, we haven't solved anything. You could have a valuation go up or down and a mill rate go in the other direction, and you haven't solved your fundamental problem. So again, I think this is really about how do we think differently about bringing costs down for all Maine families. That will have the effect that we need to have in terms of bringing costs down for the towns as well. I agree. A billionaire comes to Maine and has a gigantic house that they're only here for 2 weeks. They should be paying more in taxes, and I think there are ways other states have had success in doing that. But I think we've got to think creatively. We've got to be innovative. We've got to think about how can we be more efficient, and fundamentally, how do we bring costs down for all Maine families? And that will also help in towns as well.
We have tribal communities here in our county and Washington County, so this next question is a very important question for our county. Do you favor accepting and approving in law the amendments to the 1980 Maine Indian Land Claims Settlement and implementing acts as outlined by tribal and state leaders in a set of task force recommendations from 2019? What is your understanding of tribal sovereignty and the lack of recognition of it here in Maine? And we'll begin with Shenna Bellows.
So when I first moved back home to Maine in 2005 to run the ACLU, a friend of mine gave me a book about Indian law and pointed out to me that Maine tribes were the only tribes in the nation that weren't treated like every other tribe. So that's when I started working on tribal sovereignty. When I was in the state Senate, I was on the Judiciary Committee, and we brought those recommendations to that committee, and we almost got it passed, but we didn't because of opposition from the governor's office. And that's an area where I disagree with Governor Mills. So I have visited here the chiefs and tribal councils at Pleasant Point and Indian Township. And I've been up to Holton Band and Maliseet and the Mi'kmaq again to meet with the chiefs and the tribal councils in person and to pledge to them tribal sovereignty on day one. So I'm proud of my longstanding partnership with the tribal nations on a variety of issues. As head of Maine State Archives, we invited a tribal archivist and historian to curate the Department of Indian Affairs collection. We were the first archives in the country to use traditional knowledge labels, to place knowledge labels with indigenous knowledge on parts of our collection to be more inclusive. I helped champion a constitutional amendment that passed the legislature to make sure that we start printing the previously secret parts of the Maine Constitution recognizing the tribal treaties. We got that passed in the legislature and then passed by the voters. And this year, as the printer of the Maine State Constitution, I'll be printing the Constitution that's in entirety. So I'm proud of my longstanding relationship with the tribal nations. I've worked closely with them for over 20 years. And as your next governor, it is going to be a day one priority. I think it's really important.
This is where my dark secret for my campaign starts. Is I am not actually born here in Maine. I was born in Texas, and this is why I'm going to state that is my father had always said that we were family with the Coshada Indian tribes of East Texas. We had established the first direct democracy called Fredonia. It was with the Republic there, they would shoot you in the head, and the Gonzalez family was tired of that. And so 800 families, Hispanic, Indian, and Aaron Cherry Sr. rose up one day, and for 10 days, they had a direct democracy. And so with that, they also fought with him in the Second War, and he obtained lands for them, the deeds, and they actually recorded those after the war, and there's a plaque for him. And so if that's what my ancestors are doing, and I know everybody here takes great faith in their and pride in their Maine history. I date someone that's a Easterner. She's ninth generation. I'm sure they trusted the British back then. But this is the history of our nation, and people don't want to see it. I was raised to recognize Andrew Jackson as some sort of glorious figure, and he's not, right? This is a global perspective. He is not. James K. Polk took Mexico from, the Hispanics there. So this country, part of this Trump is we're struggling with our history. There are people out there that just can't accept the fact that we have taken this land, some of our ancestors, and we need to restore it now. And when asked about this question, My only caveats were this, and this is from working out there with Native Americans in, as an FBI agent. Um, you know, if there's a casino, I just want to see how big it is, because what happens when I've lived in properties in areas that had a casino is bank robberies go up, everything goes up. There's not enough to handle the gambling addiction. So that's just one thing. The other thing is, if they want full sovereignty for criminal justice, yes, just show me that, and it's a done deal. Thank you.
So that's something I, feel very strongly about. I mean, when I got to legislature, I didn't know nearly as much about it as I do now. I sat in the front row in the House. I sat alongside of Donna Loring and Fred Moore, and that's when I started understanding more and more about what's happened to the tribes in Maine. And there's no way that you can compare, like, as a working class person, I've seen, in my community, a lot of unfairness. But there's no way that you can compare to the unfairness of what the tribes have had done to them here in Maine. I mean, really, some of this is incredibly horrific. And, when Mike Carpenter and Donna Bailey talked to us about opening up the tribes, myself and Speaker Gideon, opening up the Settlement Act, I thought it was a small way to try and restore some of that unfairness. And I don't think the tribes really trusted us at the time when we brought them in and talked to them about it. But after a while, I think they did see that, we were being sincere, that we wanted to do the best that we could to try and give something back. And that's why, to me, this has been something that I feel very strongly about. 575 tribes federal tribes across the United States. Only 4 don't get tribal sovereignty, and they're all right here in Maine, in a state that says that our motto is "I lead," but we don't lead on this, and it bothers me a lot. I think we have to do this, and honestly, I see again power and influence that's holding us back on this, and the same power and influence that holds me back in the logging industry, holds people back in the fishing industry, are the same people that are holding back tribal sovereignty. I mean, it's the same lobby that's holding us back on tribal sovereignty, and it is. It's really something that pisses me off, and it's something that I will do.
Yeah, Troy's exactly right. The history here is horrific, and since the Settlement Claims Act was signed, the world has also changed. We are in a different place than we were 50 plus years ago. And I think we've got to recognize that. And I think we've got to make changes that reflect that and reflect, those changes. But I think the first thing, though, to me, is that the relationship has really fundamentally broken down between the state and the tribes. And I think if we don't solve that piece, I think the rest of it is actually going to be less successful. I think if you don't have trust, if you don't have relationships, if you don't have ways to work out the challenges that are going to exist, I think you may have traded one set of problems for a new set of problems. And I do worry a lot about making sure that the relationship is what's strong, because with a strong relationship, you can work through whatever those challenges are. You can work through the size of the casino or whatever those questions are, when there are conflicts around environmental laws or things like that. But unless you've solved the relationship problem, I think you're just trading, again, one problem for another set of litigation or fights or things that end up being a real challenge. So I'm hopeful that we can do that, and we can do it in a way, and we can change the legislation in a way that respects the Wabanaki nations as well as the communities that surround them. And I'm committed to doing that work.
I think I disagree slightly with Angus. It's not about the relationship. I think it is about tribal sovereignty first. I mean, and I'm with Shenna. I think this is something we absolutely need to get done in the first month of the governor's administration. It needs to be led by the chiefs. It needs to be led by how do the tribes want to see sovereignty passed. But I think we already have a framework. And although I worked for Governor Mills for the last 6.5 years, again, like Shenna, I disagree with her position on sovereignty. I think we need to pass tribal sovereignty. And then I think we need to figure out how do we work with the tribes in sort of a government to government, nation to nation. Then you do the relationship building. So to me, tribal sovereignty is, again, again, it is about how do we give Maine's tribal nations the same rights that all the 575 others have? And then how do we figure out how do we collaborate on issues after that? I just did a great forum with Molly and Bryant, who's the head of the Wabanaki Alliance. And she speaks, I mean, so powerfully. She has done a wonderful job moving this conversation forward in the state of Maine. But we need to get beyond tribal sovereignty, and then we need to figure out how do we work together. I mean, there's a story in one of the newspapers today about Pleasant Point and the drinking water and how that issue is still not solved. People still can't trust. They still don't like the water they're drinking. They still haven't figured out how to move that forward. And the fundamental access to clean water, fundamental access to to the rivers and to the ocean, and your ability to do sustenance fishing. I mean, these are things where we need to start working on those issues in a collaborative way. So I think there's a lot to be done for the next governor to pass sovereignty and then get beyond those and figure out how do we collaborate to improve the lives of tribal citizens, but also the lives of Maine people. And I think there's really good work to be done.
Thank you. Next question. How would you address climate change in Maine, particularly in the face of the current federal administration's denial of climate change, cutbacks, and defunding of programs? And what green energy programs would you support? And we'll begin with Jason Cherry.
This is a topic where many experts, well, I'm a science-based, so there is climate change. So I do believe in climate change, and again, we could talk all day about Trump and it would be preaching to the choir. So for this, there is a number of opinions on what is going to bring Maine into the 22nd century as far as having a stable electric grid or energy grid. Right now, we're facing about $427 million in rates hikes from CPM. So the question is clear, is when are they going to push us to the point that we have an independent grid? And I say this because every time Calgary or Versant has a bad economic year, we are the backup for them. Economically, this is true. If they have bad decisions, you and I are going to pay for those increased rates. And how independent is this Public Utility Commission? I don't know, but I'm like you. Many people here, I graduated from poverty, and what we need is independence in our electric grid. And then we need to look on what sources of electricity do we need to generate. I think Angus King's biomass factory is an awesome addition to that grid, but alone, as I went to the Common Grounds, is it going to be solar, little groups of solar, or are we going to take a look at the energy corridor? I spoke to a number of Common Grounds environmentalists there. They don't like the environmental damage, the damage to indigenous populations from the Canadian electrical grid. And so can we fix that to make it better? Because otherwise, folks, it's either a diversified grid with biomass and solar, or it's nuclear. And no one wants to go nuclear. I mean, that's going to be a ballot question. So we either have to relook at this, because this is what's going to charge our economy in the future.
So, I mean, obviously, climate crisis is real. Go up my way and you see what's going on with, the rivers in the springtime, exploding, the big ice jams, water running like crazy because of big clear cuts and things like that. But I think the big thing is we have to bring people along, smartly and not try and, run over people. When we were trying to get offshore wind in the Maine legislature, I mean, there was this idea that we should just run right over the lobster industry, which, I mean, I'm not a lobster fisherman, but I have a lot of understanding of the challenges of them being a logger. I mean, it's completely different, but I mean, there's a lot of similarities. And so it was not my intention to tell them, look, just get on board and figure it out. And so we brought them in, Lobster 207, we brought the environmental community in, we brought the labor community in, and we talked about how we could do this, where everyone, a win-win situation. And the idea was that if we could stay out of the lobster management area 1, and do offshore wind just outside of it, then we could do that. The biggest thing about it was that it created a little bit more cost to go that much further out. But if we could get BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy, to agree to do the lease outside of there, then the state of Maine could pick up the additional costs. But, you know, the governor's office, the federal delegation, everyone was like, well, this is not going to work. But, you know, we kept at the table, the people at the legislature did. And then whenever we passed the bill, BOEM come out with the leases, we did stay outside of the thing. And that's, to me, is how you work these things. You bring everybody in, and you keep everybody at the table until you do get at that. And that's how we do climate change. Is everyone's voice matters. Don't drive it down people's throats. Keep people there until we get a deal.
Yeah, there's certainly climate change is real, and there's a lot of talk and conversation about it. I have spent half of my career building climate solutions. I've spent a lot of it building wind and solar projects across the country and around the world. And then, as I mentioned, I built this project here in Maine and started a renewable energy company inside the utility. Look, we need more energy. We need it to have less carbon. We need it now, and we need it to be affordable. If it is not one of those things, it's going to be very tough to actually do. And the good news is, well, the bad news is what Trump is doing is exactly the wrong direction on all of those fronts, right? He is actually actively hurting the energy system that we need to achieve all of those goals. The good news is solar and wind, when done correctly, can in fact achieve all four of those goals. They can provide more energy that's lower carbon, that is soon available soon, and is lower cost. That is exactly the kind of thing that we need, and that's exactly what I've done in my career. But we also, despite what Trump is doing, we can also do better. Right now, we make it too hard to build things in this country. We make it too hard to build things here in Maine, and it has a huge impact on the costs of energy that we have. In Australia right now, they build solar for about a third the cost that we do, because they have figured out how to work through their permitting process, how to work through their interconnection process, how to make it so that they can build projects in a way that still has high environmental standards, but does not take the amount of time. 1/3 of the cost. So we can do a lot here in Maine to make sure that we can try and replicate that and bring costs down for Mainers. I think that's a critical piece of any time that we're going to be building renewable energy, which is obviously, to me, a really important part of how we're going to move forward on climate.
So I told you grew up and still live on an offshore island. I mean, I know all of you in this room. We are on the front lines of what's happening with the changing climate. I've spent the last 6.5 years co-chairing Maine's Climate Council. Governor LePage said climate wasn't real. It was a hoax. And when Governor Mills came into office, she said, we need to start taking action. We need to both reduce our emissions and do our part to help with this global challenge, but we also need to start preparing our communities for the reality that is here. And obviously, again, I mentioned the big storms. You've seen them here. They are here, and we are not ready. So there's a lot that needs to be done. And I'm really proud of the work we've done to install heat pumps, to invest in renewable energy, to invest in clean energy jobs, to prepare our communities for the kinds of climate changes we're already seeing. My team in state government started a program called the Community Resilience Partnership that is now helping 283 towns in Maine decide what they think is locally important. Again, whether it's making the town office more energy efficient, putting clean energy on a sewer plant, or figuring out how do we deal with sea level rise. So I think, honestly, climate solutions very often best come from the local level. How do we figure out what is important to the community? What are people worried about? What are the vulnerabilities? And then how do we help communities address it? I think climate is and will continue to impact every part of our state and our economy. Obviously, it's incredibly impactful on energy prices. We still send $4 billion a year out of Maine to buy fossil fuels. If we can invest in clean energy at a more affordable rate, we create jobs in Maine, but we also bring cheaper power to our state. So I think there is so much more for the next governor to do on this issue. Obviously, climate is impacting our forest sector, our farms, and our fishing industry. How they transition and adapt to a changing climate, it's going to be important. And that reality is now already here. So I'm excited to dig in and continue to lead because there's a lot more to do.
I've been an environmentalist my whole life. I worked at the Mount Desert Island Biological Laboratory in high school and college, and I wrote my college thesis on sustainability, looking at the economics and biology of climate change back in 1997. So while my career took me into democracy, I did have a time where I worked for Sierra Club, and I served on the Manchester Conservation Commission in my town for many years. So I am passionate about this issue. And I think we're in this moment where there's a false dichotomy, right? Solar has been posed as the enemy, as the Republicans and the right wing are blaming solar energy for rising electricity costs. And Governor Mills has done a tremendous job with installing heat pumps in low income homes. But I talked to a woman a couple of days ago, and she said she doesn't turn it on because the electricity rates are too high. And so I would like to do for residential solar what Governor Mills has done for heat pumps. Let's put solar panels, including plug-in solar, which is only legal in Utah right now, the plug-in solar panels. Let's put those in LIHEAP eligible homes so that there's an energy source to power those heat pumps so people can stay warm and so we can stop burning up billions of dollars. Let's also get creative and smart, both about wind, but also about tidal, perhaps in the Bay right here. And I think that all options need to be on the table. This is an existential threat. But most importantly, given what Trump is doing, given what this Congress is doing, we need leaders who are tested in creating legal strategies and political strategies to fight back against an abusive federal government, because we need to continue to make progress here in our state, no matter what comes at us from the feds.
Maine just had a summer growing season with historic drought conditions. Reports say this could adversely affect next year's harvest. How would you support Maine's farmers and its agricultural economy? And we'll begin with Troy Jackson.
Well, I think the department has to have a different mindset of having a smaller farmer mindset. I've chaired the ACF committee. We've had bills in there for food sovereignty. We've had bills in there for trying to make a rural economy for smaller farms that have been pushed back against consistently. Everything we've tried to do to try and make it so that smaller farms had more of a role has had challenges. And I think that we need to have, one of the bills that I did pass was to try and get more irrigation to smaller farms. It hasn't been funded as of yet. I think that's another way that smaller farmers need help, is to get, irrigation systems that are, expensive, but in times whenever, water challenges are, a problem right now, getting help from the state government, would be a big boost. But we just don't. We don't have a state government right now that looks to smaller farms, smaller logging, anything smaller. It's all this big business, big agri, and we watched that go that way for far too long. And that's what I would like to change, giving them smaller grants, smaller incentives to small farms, so we wouldn't have all of the our eggs in one basket. So that would be what I would be trying to do, to try and help prop up our small farm economy across the state, much like with the food sovereignty law that we did pass and has done a lot to try and help small farmers sell their wares in their communities.
There's no question that farmers feed us all, right? And I've been fortunate in my career to spend a lot of time with farmers here down in central Maine. All those dairy farmers were the backbone of that project that we built. Without them and without their cows, we've got no clean energy for all of us. So it's a tough business even in a good time, never mind in a drought. And in many ways, we can do I think, a lot more to help support those farmers, help them with innovation, help them support. One of the things that Trump has done, you're going to get a lot of agreement, I think, at this table about the bad things that Donald Trump has done. Cutting a program that encourages getting local foods into schools, again, strikes me as one of the all-time dumbest decisions you could possibly have. It hurts farms, it hurts nutrition, and it hurts local schools. And I think undoing that or defending against that is going to be important. But the last thing is about, they are all small businesses. As Troy said, the people who run these family farms, even if they've been doing it for generations, it is partially because of the love of the land and the produce and the animals that they raise, but it's also a business. And running a business here in Maine is an incredibly difficult thing. The red tape that we sort of apply to running a small business is extraordinarily higher than it is in a lot of other states. And I think there's a lot of work that we can do to try and make it easier so that they can continue to run their businesses and focus on the cows, focus on the livestock, focus on the plants, focus on their workers, and not so much on the regulatory burden that we put on top of them. I think that's really important, again, not just for farmers, but for all small businesses. And I think there's a lot of work that we can do. I think we've just got to think about it in a different way. My life has been spent in business. I'm aware of those challenges, and I think we can make a real difference doing it.
So when I was little, my mom and dad actually were small farmers. My mom helped start the Maine Organic Farmers and Growers Apprenticeship Program when she had just graduated from College of the Atlantic. And Maine now has thousands of small farmers. And I think we're really proud of the growth, especially of young families coming back to Maine and starting small family farms. But it is incredibly challenging. And this drought is another climate driven event that has caused a lot of chaos and disruption for farmers, and big and small farms are facing these. And how small farmers manage this, it is about innovation. It is about infrastructure. We've been able to make some investments, but actually the federal government has pulled the rug out from under many small farmers, taking away grants that they'd received over the last couple of years, where in some cases, the farmers had made the investments in greenhouses and irrigation systems, and then they're faced to deal with the debt. So obviously that situation is untenable. I think there is a role for state government to help small businesses invest in that infrastructure, especially to make the transition, because I think we're going to be dealing with these kind of changing climate events. We're going to be dealing with heavier rainfall. We've seen it. We're going to be dealing with more droughts, and that requires new ways of farming. This does get back to, though, it's similar to oil. How do we help Maine people be fed by Maine farmers? We import a lot of food into Maine every single year. And so the ability to have our farmers grow food for our families, that's something that state government can do with market support. It can do working with food pantries. Maine, as you know, we're all going to see these huge cuts to our SNAP programs. How do we make up for that? Another statistic, 20% of kids in Washington County are in poverty. They don't have enough food to eat. So the ability to think about food systems and food insecurity is, I think, a huge opportunity for the governor. My office helped lead a plan to end hunger in Maine by 2030. And a big part of that is actually partnering with farmers so the food that we grow in Maine can be used to help food insecurity in our state.
So just after Labor Day, my husband and I vacationed in Lubec, and we went to the Lubec Farmers Market, and I couldn't help but ask folks, what were the issues on their minds? And what I was hearing is what Troy is saying, the availability of easy access to capital for investment in irrigation and infrastructure systems is really something that state government could do, particularly microloans. And when I was a Peace Corps volunteer, a small business development volunteer, I helped establish a microlending program in Panama, in rural Panama. And I think there's that microlending idea that it doesn't have to necessarily be huge infusions of capital, but low interest or no interest rate loans to help people do what they need to do. And then more recently, I went up to Aroostook County for the potato harvest and also saw the broccoli harvest while I was there. And chatting with them, they said processing. So the value add of having a processing facility in Aroostook County has been significant. So what can the state do for infrastructure so that we can process our natural resources, including agricultural products, right here in the state to add value. And then what I heard in both Washington and Aroostook County was healthcare costs. So farmers, like small business owners, they need access to healthcare to be able to keep doing the work. And I was talking to one farmer, he said his wife is a teacher and he couldn't do it but for her health insurance. So I think as we think about healthcare, that's going to also support agriculture. So those are just a few things.
I think you've got to look at the problem from the federal, that will help drive what we're going to do as Mainers. And the reason why I say this is obviously this president is an open corruption sort of corruption. He's gotten presents from every oil producing country in the world right in front of our faces, and now he's getting rid of the EPA. So what does the future of Maine look like for its farmers that are struggling against climate change? And I think at this point, we can't be flat-footed again. We need to tackle this problem using science, using cost-benefit analysis. So what's going to happen is we're going to need to identify which aquifers, those areas that have underground water that are going to be accessible by small farms. And I agree with Troy on small farms. We don't want to end up like California, where all the corporate farms own all the water. We need to make sure that we have a sustainable farming system, that it works for Mainers. This is Maine culture. We are not, we could fire every lobsterman here and just hire one corporation just to do that. That's not what Maine's about. We need to look at where these farms are suffering the drought the worst. We need to take geologists out there, look for the aquifers that get refreshed, and mine those so that we'll drill down so that we have pump stations that will keep these farms alive. We can't, again, be flat-footed. If this is the future of what the federal government is doing, they're doing nothing but killing this environment for money for this one person, but there doesn't seem to be any change going on anytime soon. So as Mainers, we must grab this problem together, work with the families that farm, look at corporate farms and say, yes, you've got this profit, but you're going to have to pay extra if you're going to need all this water. We do not want to be California and give up all our water rights based upon these corporate farms paying into the politicians' pockets. I'm an independent. I would go out there with the geologist and make sure that we have sustainable sources of water for these farms.
Maine has a long history of fishing, particularly lobster fishing, and this next question deals with that. Currently, there is a battle between right whale conservationists and Maine's lobstermen. As of now, a judicial stay on further regulations is in place through 2028, when additional evidence will be reviewed as to the impact fishing lines have on the right whale. Because of conservationists' push for ropeless fishing in Zone A, inshore and offshore, fishermen contend that this will, in effect, put the majority of lobstermen out of business, either through massive costs and concentrated gear with faulty technology. The update on whale conservation measures will be finalized in 2028, the middle of the next governor's first term. As governor, will you ensure that the Department of Marine Resources continues to collect real data regarding the migratory patterns of right whales, and what other specific measures, including a moratorium on the use of ropeless fishing, will you support to ensure all Maine's lobstermen have a fair chance to continue making their living in Maine's lobster fishing industry? And that we will begin with Angus King III. Yeah.
Sorry. Look, no one comes to Maine to eat chicken. And the men and women who fish for lobsters here in Maine have been doing it sustainably for over 100 years. And no one knows more or cares more about the health of our ocean than they do. And we've got to continue to support them. We've got to continue to help them, not just make sure that they can navigate this particularly difficult water, but also, and of course, more data is always good to answer the question specifically. But we've got to support them in other ways as well. we've really got to make sure that, again, fundamentally, these lobstermen are small businessmen and women. And it is a hard job. I was a lobsterman as a kid for a summer. It is one of the hardest things I've ever done. No one would let me in their car on the way home every day after a day over a bait bucket. And it's hard work, and we just don't need to make it any harder. And so I think we can do a lot of work to try and help lobstermen as small business people continue to live, thrive, and survive. It is a difficult business, again, not just because of the hard work, but also just because of the reality of the rest of the populations of fish. I was in Little Cranberry the other day, and they were bringing in bait fish from all over the world. I mean, they're running it's almost a totally separate business just to try and navigate making sure that they've got bait in order to get out on the water every day. It is a hard, difficult business to run, and we've got to make sure that we can help them manage that business in a way that's not more burdensome as they go out and do the important work that they do every day.
So my hometown and my legislative district was sort of the heart of lobstering in Maine. And there's a ton happening in down east. If anything, actually the lobsters are kind of moving this direction. But my district went from Vinyl Haven up to Swans Island. It included Stonington and Deer Isle. So I've talked to a lot of fishermen over the years, and they're some of my favorite people. And they will tell you what they think in no uncertain terms. And they're some of my best friends. And I will say this challenge that we face right now with right whale regulation, it is a very, very big one. And it is actually one where we've seen bipartisan agreement in Washington. Our entire delegation worked with the governor to have this moratorium go into effect because we didn't have the science. We knew that we were not seeing right whales in inland waters in Maine. And so to require all fishermen to change the way they fish and make it more dangerous was going to be catastrophic. It was not just going to be catastrophic for fishermen, but all of the communities that are reliant on fishing. And that is huge, huge here in Washington County. So obviously we are now collecting the data. The state is working with federal folks, but I think we're going to probably need to continue this moratorium because I think ropeless fishing is unlikely to be there in a couple of years. It's not a technology that most fishing families can afford. And so I think we need to keep looking at the science, but I think it's probably not viable. And we need to figure out how to work with the federal administration. And this is maybe one area in which Trump may agree with Maine fishermen that the kinds of regulations that are being asked for are not reasonable. They will not allow families to continue to make a living. So I think this is kind of one of those common sense things where Republicans and Democrats may agree. And again, this could be catastrophic, honestly, for our coastal communities. So finding a path forward that allows people to keep fishing is going to be essential.
So I thought this was going to be a civil forum, but now you said that your town was at the heart of the lobster industry in Maine, and I grew up in Hancock, so we may have to have words after.
We can add up all
the catches. I don't know what the daily catches in their various towns along Washington, Hancock, and Knox County are, but we can go toe to toe later on that. But I do agree completely with Hannah in that I think that we need to support our lobster fishing industry. It is quintessential Maine. And we do need to continue to collect data and to make sure that stakeholders are at the table and to make sure that we're being really thoughtful and reflective and supporting what makes Maine Maine.
I think, as I mentioned, I was a conservation officer. And so this was in Oregon, and, people were the last people to blame themselves for the lack of fisheries there. So I would show them these old black and white photos, and there it's all about salmon. And the boats were so full of salmon back in these black and white photos that it's very obvious that they overfished. And they're complaining about the seal population killing all the salmon. I said the seal population's 10% what it was. And so we do, as human beings, have a tendency not to blame ourselves for the environmental issues. But this is one of those things where the data is not showing the urgency. However, it still needs to be studied. So I did the study on this. There's at least 2 white whales that were outside of the area to be regulated. Now, if that's not true, then I need to get a state administrator that information so that all parties have that information in front of them. I have worked with more than one marine biologist. There is more than one way to skin a cat, and this is well, not even that. That's not environmental at all. But for these whales, for these whales, the rope, no cat skinning. For these whales, that rope could be changed. You could change the color. You could put a device on there. They have magnetic. I don't want to go too much into the science, but I've studied the science here, and we can get people to look at this and decide, is this a problem? And if it is, how can we do it in a manner that's not going to bankrupt these poor families? So I'm not for anything other than to make sure that when we have an idea, it meets with both the environment and the people whose everyday lives rely upon these fisheries. The second thing is that it appears that lobsters are moving away because of the warmer waters. What can we do? And I'm going to use this word epigenetic because it's the marine biologist. Can we create a species that stays in these waters and can be easily harvested?
So the first term I was Senate President, I asked NOAA to come and meet with us. I brought the Machinists Union in because they represent a large group of lobstermen across the coast here. And the chair of the Marine Resources Committee, and I think there's about 7 of NOAA. And I asked them, and we all did, we asked them, what their belief was about right whale in the Gulf of Maine. And they said that they did not see evidence of right whale in the Gulf of Maine anymore because the copepods, because of the warming weather, the copepods were going outside the Gulf of Maine. So much so that they did not fly over the Gulf of Maine anymore because they just did not believe there was evidence of them. And it was shocking to us at that time, and we asked them consistently about it. And that was what we got from NOAA. And why was it that they would continue to make this argument? And to me, it became a political thing with them that, people were forcing them to continue to argue that there were right whales, but they were not even flying over anymore. And the fishermen, there's danger in what people are asking them to do because of some of this, putting more traps on the ropes and things like that. It causes more, like I said, danger and things like that. And so that concerns me a lot also. And I won't. I mean, people put a lot of politics in this, but the reality was that there was people that went to Washington and got those votes. That was not our delegation, was not the governor that got these votes, got this moratorium. And I will push to continue this moratorium until we have the data that shows one way or the other if there are right whale that still frequent the Gulf of Maine or not, because I feel this is something, again, that's really important, and people's lives are put at risk whenever we put these requirements on.
Thank you. Many of Maine's schools are in various stages of disrepair or in some cases need replacing. The present funding system and rising construction costs continue to force school districts to defer maintenance or replacement. As governor, what would you do to address this? And we're going to start off with Hannah Pingree.
Great. Well, obviously, I think there's a lot that our schools need. I'm a mom of 2 kids. They're 12 and 14, and I've chaired a school board. And I know just how important quality schools are to Maine kids. I mean, the entire future of our state and our economy is dependent on how we take care of our kids and how we help them get educated in a way that they can be successful, whatever they want to go on to do, whether it's be fishermen or work in the trades or go to college. So obviously, I think having a governor who cares a lot about education is essential. So in terms of school construction, there's actually been a ton of work done on this over the last couple of years. We know there's a very long list of schools waiting for funding, and then we have 500 or 600 schools in Maine that are in really bad shape. This kind of formula does not work. And there have been a number of proposals made to think about how do we better fund schools in the future? How do we help more with communities' ability to pay? Because you have some pretty wealthy Southern Maine schools who get, $100+ million schools funded by the state. And then a lot of other schools are waiting all over the state for their school to be funded. So we need to kind of rethink how we pay for it, how we help communities pay for it based on their ability to pay? And then how do we honestly inject more money into this system? Because a lot of schools that don't have good heating systems, they're in poor repair, they're not good for kids. And so we need to find a way to better start funding schools and their construction needs right away. And this is about revenue. And so this is where we get to how do we better raise revenue from the wealthiest in our state? How do we better raise revenue from people who come visit here in the summertime? Because the only way to do this, there are creative funding formulas for capital, but it is about finding the funds to do this. And I do think our kids matter. Improving the quality of our schools and the quality of the education of our schools is something fundamental to the future of our state. And I'm ready to go all in on that one.
But for my quality public education at Hancock Grammar School and Ellsworth High School, I wouldn't be sitting here today as Maine's first female Secretary of State and candidate for governor. I am passionate about quality public education. And I think we need to think about funding for schools as well as teacher pay and school funding more generally. And, I went back to Hancock Grammar School about a year ago. As Secretary of State, we do mock elections and we do civics education in the classroom. And I was a little bit astonished that the building was exactly the same, except there were trailers in the yard for some additional services. And so I do think we have a real problem, and that the way we've been funding schools is clearly not working, because the list of needed facilities far exceeds the ability to build it in the next 20 years, much less the near term. So I think Hannah's right. I think we have to be creative in thinking about revenues. I think we need to think about capital and whether we leverage some of the state's enormous budget. We have a multi-billion-dollar budget to actually just get these built. And when we build them, I think we need to think about energy. We need to think about rising temperatures and keeping our kids cool at the beginning and ends of the school years. We need to think about airflow in a time of COVID and other potential diseases. We need to think about clean air in our schools. So I don't have a magic answer, but what I do have is the commitment to making schools one of our biggest priorities, because that is the pathway of opportunity for every Maine child.
I know as the kind of outside candidate, we have very great candidates here with excellent backgrounds. For me, it's all about looking at this issue from the outside and coming up with innovation that is based upon economic realities and sustainability, and having those meetings and being a state administrator that works with all parties, because I have no bad blood across any, I'm going to fight, but there's going to be, the better thing is for me not to fight if we have compromise. And school districts are one of those areas where we need a bipartisan solution. The bipartisan solution is to buy by economies by scale. So you have every school purchasing its own supplies. How come the state cannot do that at a wholesale? You have every school trying to hire IT people that are paying for thousands of dollars is what it costs. Most states are now consolidating that technology into a kind of virtualized system so that one or two school districts actually control all the computing power, and they have multi-factor authentication, endpoint detection and response, and they're cheaper. You have those types of innovations that we're seeing in other schools with the same amount of funding. Now, right now, the reading skills for Maine are below some other the southern states. We would hope that our rates are very high. If the old system, if the old regime is still working, then why is that statistic there? I want to go at this and take a look at the curriculum and make sure that we're studying the things that we're supposed to be studying to get these kids a better start. What are they learning in school that's not allowing them to read? How are they going to use critical thinking? And that's how we fund not only a good curriculum, but we work across the aisles to see what sources of what sources of funding that we have, what can we cut to build a future for our children. Thank you.
So I started this out saying that, I'm fighting for everyday Mainers, and that you're all sick of hearing the same old, and why things aren't working. You're hearing the same old promises and things like that. I mean, a number of years ago, I don't know how many of you might have voted for this or not, but there was a 3% surcharge put on income tax for education. It passed overwhelmingly across the state of Maine. It went to the legislature. LePage, stamped his feet and held his breath, and it got repealed. And I fought to keep it in place. That was the second biggest tax cut before the one that he did before. I mean, we've cut about 7% off income tax over the last 10, 12 years here. Again, it comes down to what your priorities are here in Maine. Do you want to fund schools, or do you want to give income tax cuts to the wealthiest people in the state? I don't. That's why our state budgets have stopped here over the last couple of years of 2/3 or simple majorities. I won't do income tax cuts for the wealthiest people in Maine. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to fight for everyday working class people. And that has been one of the holdup of time and time again. I'm not fighting for lobbyists. I'm not fighting for wealthy people. I'm fighting for everyday people. And this is something that I care about also. And that is going to be the difference, is when the lobbyists come in and ask for income tax cuts and crap like that, they can turn right around, go the hell back out. Because that's been the things that I've been fighting against time and time again. And this will be one of the things that I will fight for. I'm going to fight for a fair tax system so that we can fund things like this. Because we've been doing it for too long their way, and it doesn't work.
No question, it's not working. We owe it to our kids and to our future to have our schools be functional. And I think, as Shenna mentioned, right now our reading and math scores are falling below Mississippi, which should trouble all y'all. That is a terrible outcome. 30 years ago, we were near the top of the country, and today we are near the bottom. That is an abysmal result, and something that we've really got to turn around. But we also have aging schools. I think most of our schools are 50 to 60 years old, and there's an enormous overhang in terms of cost that is coming. But I'll tell you, there are people working right now to try and figure out how we're going to address these costs, because the state, right now doesn't have the money to do all of those schools at the same time. But the current program just simply doesn't work. I was talking to someone in Windham the other day where they're building a new school for 900 kids, and it's going to cost $170 million. That's an extraordinary amount of money. And I said, boy, I'll bet it's going to be a nice school. And are you worried about the cost? And she said, no. All that money is going to come from the state. I said, gee, I don't know. It feels like all of us are the state. That money doesn't just come from an invisible bucket. It comes from all of us. And I think we've got to, right now, the program is one that actually encourages that kind of thinking, right? Encourages, this is my one shot, maybe for the next 50 years. So we better sort of blow it out and spend as much as we possibly can. And so I think we've got to really start thinking about it differently. Are we thinking about renovations in the right way? To Jason's point, are we thinking about innovation and efficiency the right way? The Windham School did actually put two schools together, and that was sort of the effort that they did in order to get a single new school. I think that's actually a pretty good idea. And I think there's real opportunity there. So I think that it's going to be an enormous effort for us in terms of cost, and we've got to start thinking about it in a different way. But I think we can innovate. I've done it most of my career, but I think we're going to have to do it again, as Jason said, in a bipartisan way, because that's what's going to get us to a place where we're properly educating our kids.
This concludes the question and answer period of our forum. Thank you to the candidates for their answers, and to the audience for your attention. And now each of the candidates will have 1 minute for their closing statements. We'll start with Hannah Pingree and go down the line and end with Shenna Bellows.
Great. Well, thank you, Lisa. You made it. And to the audience, you sat here for 2 hours. Give yourself a round of applause.
Yeah.
Amazing. I will just say it's been a real pleasure to spend this time with you all. Again, I appreciate you all showing up. I said this a couple times. I am the mom of 2 kids, and the decision to run for office was not an easy one because, I don't get to spend as much time with our kids. But this is such an important time for our country. This is such an important time for our state, to ensure that we have experienced leaders who know how to stand up for Maine people and also know how to get things done. So we didn't even talk about the issue of housing today. And housing is actually one of the primary things that is driving me to run. How do we ensure that young people can afford to buy a home in the community that they grew up in? How do we ensure that families can afford the rent? How do we make sure that big out of state corporations are not buying mobile home parks and jacking up the rent? There are so many challenges facing Maine people right now, from housing to healthcare to escalating costs to encouraging sort of the bright future of economic opportunity. So I have spent, again, 24 years in public service, and I haven't made a lot of money doing it. I've done it because I really care deeply about the state and its future. I feel optimistic about what's happening in Maine, despite what President Trump is doing to our economy and to our people. And I think the state's leadership could be well served by somebody who's really ready to dig in and make a difference for all of you in this room, but for the future of our kids. So thank you for coming. I would obviously be honored by your support. And I look forward to seeing you again in Washington County.
Someone asked me the other day, what is it about this moment that makes you want to run for governor? And my answer was, what isn't it about this moment? Right? We have 2 5-alarm fires burning at the exact same time. The first is being set by a corrupt arsonist in Washington, D.C., who is burning down everything we care about, whether it's civil rights or immigration or climate or healthcare or our basic rights and food and heat. I mean, just the list goes on and on and on. But that smoke from that fire can sometimes cover up a different fire, one that has been smoldering for a lot longer, which is that people who work hard and play by the rules are falling further and further behind. And that fire actually sets the conditions for the first fire. And so if we don't address that second fire, they're going to continue to feed on each other, continue to make it worse, and make it harder and harder for working people to get through their everyday lives. But I think we can do it. I really am optimistic about what we can do. And I've spent my entire career building things like housing, companies, good jobs, clean energy, and I've done it by bringing people together and focusing on our common ground. That's the way you can get things done. Sometimes the common ground, we may have 90%. Sometimes it may just be George Smith's 10%. But there's always something that we have in common. And as long as we focus on those things, I know that we can do great things here in Maine. So with your ideas and with your energy, and of course, with your support and your vote, I'm excited about what we can do to build a better Maine. And I really appreciate you spending the time with us today. Thanks, everybody.
Well, I wanted to thank everyone for today, and I want to invite everybody to Lebec Brewing. We're going to have an event over there. So if nothing else, you can come over and have a cold beer on us. And I want to say that, I said this before, but it is, the truth. Where I come from, much like here, everyone, we come from a production-based industry. And logging, you go out, you haul a load of wood. Most of my time, I watch my dad later on in life, my father-in-law today, my son. They go to work, and if something happens, something breaks down. If you blow a tire, if the equipment breaks, you don't get paid, and you have to fix that. And like I said, with my dad, if it was 30 below, he would be out there fixing that because he had to deliver. And that's the world that we were in, and I understand that, and I feel the sense of urgency. And I can't speak for the rest of the people up here, but I know the sense of urgency. That's what my life has been. That you have to deliver, and for me, this is what this race is about: delivering on property taxes, delivering on healthcare, delivering on all the things that working class people need, because that's who I am. That has always been who I am. And when Angus talks about 10%, well, I've had a hard time finding somebody that agreed with me on the 10% for working class people. And I've been in government for a long time. We didn't talk about labor today. We didn't talk about the working class issues that very few people care about in Augusta, and the things that I've fought for with governors time and time again that don't care about the things that I care about, and the bills that I've had vetoed time and time again. I am the person that have had the most bills vetoed by anyone in this entire state, because when working class people want something in Augusta, oftentimes they don't get it. And that's why I'm running for governor. And so if you care about that, if you care about not letting the status quo continue, then you'll be voting for me. But if you want it the way it is right now, then I guess you won't be. So I really support or hope you'll support changing the system, because it is not working for us across the state. And I appreciate your time.
I've also, like Hannah, had a long history of public service. I've been a public defender. I've been a conservation officer, FBI agent for 20 years that worked on excessive use of force for police officers. I probably have taken 12 badges, unfortunately, human trafficking, and also working on infrastructure. When the Epstein case came out and I knew that it was a big cover-up, when I was transferred up here to Bangor to try to help against the drug trafficking. I retired and my kids can't afford a house. They have a senator who says that they must be 70 years old before they have Social Security. So I ran. And there was no town halls. There was no democracy. And so that's what's hitting the ears of your more conservative citizens here, is that we need real bipartisan reform. 46 states vote for their own attorney general. Otherwise, it's going to be the legislature and the governor. I will govern, but I am a state administrator. You are the people that have ownership of government. And until we seize that ownership, nothing will change. We need mandatory town halls. We need politicians that talk to us. We need an online system where we can talk about the things that matter for us. Otherwise, these extremists will get into Augusta and they will disregard what the working class want and need. We are, we have both Canadian power, we have Massachusetts power, we have oil. We need Maine for Mainers. There used to be a time where as Maine goes, so goes the rest of the nation. There are democracies out there that have far more competency, transparency, efficiency, and advocacy. Those are over in Europe. Switzerland has some of the best democratic mechanisms. That is in the name of our party. We deserve to have that mechanism pushed forward, and that's what conservatives are responding to. I kid you not. Here at the Blueberry Festival, I had more than a number of Republicans come up to our tent and want to discuss and debate, because they're tired of being poor. They're tired of looking and listening to Voice of Murdoch. I mean, Sean Hannity owns 900 private individual houses. They listen to Voice of Maine, and then it becomes Voice of Murdoch. They listen to lies on there, and they are just being told misinformation. Misinformation is winning the war, folks. Unless we steal that back, we have critical thinking, we have facts in front of us, and you have some power to get in and join the modern democracies, because Maine, as much as I love it, needs some modernization. We need not to have the law office be 3 separate offices. We need to have a lot of these siloed developments into one backbone that's more secured. We need a great deal of modernization, and that is what's hitting. That's what's resonating with folks outside this county and other counties. Every time I talk to someone, it's about, hey, I wish I knew more about your background. I have a background in executive power. I work with a 60-hour calendar. I'm very highly organized. And what I am is someone that has developed trust for you. Trust. Oh, I didn't see the sign up there. Okay. Oh, okay. So I don't know a minute by natural. I guess I'm a politician. I apologize for those last 20 seconds.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out today. Coming to Washington County is always a little bit like coming home. You know, it reminds me of when I was a kid, coming to my Uncle Ted's for Thanksgiving, or over the last 20 years, coming up here time and time again on issues that matter for public conversations. I'm running for governor because we are in an extraordinarily perilous moment for our democracy. And we need leaders who are battle tested, who will stand up for what is right, even when it's hard. And I've done that time and time again. I'm doing it right now. And Trump and his cronies have thrown everything at me. I've been threatened. I've been doxxed. I've been swatted. Now we're being sued by the Department of Justice. And I don't back down because I'm Maine tough. And I've worked hard for everything that I've achieved in this life. And I'll continue working hard for you. Now, we also need bridge builders. And in 1933, fascism was on the rise. Hitler was about to open the first death camp, and we were in the Great Depression. And a Maine connected woman, Frances Perkins, created a list of practical possibilities, right? Social Security, the 40-hour work week, workers' comp, unemployment, universal health care is the only one that she didn't get done. And she presented it to President Roosevelt, and they got those things done. We're in a moment where we need to bring people together to think about the Maine that we want to see in 10 years, in 20 years, in 50 years, in 100 years. So I think we need both strength and resistance to what's coming federally, and vision and coalition building are practical possibilities to move our state forward. So because of ranked choice voting, something I was on the founding member of the committee for ranked choice voting, you can vote for all of us. That's the good news. I hope you'll consider ranking me number 1. Thank you very much.
Again, thank you to these 5 wonderful candidates. And I would invite you, if you have time, please stay for a bit and have an informal conversation with the candidates. And thank you so much and have a good afternoon.
A little back broom. Angus, are you paying?